Hello, 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 and welcome back to the podcast. So those of you who've been listening for a while know that I have worked with a number of children who have neurodevelopmental disorders. And frequently I will hear back from parents years after that initial evaluation that I may have done when a child was 5, 6, 7 years old. And now I'm hearing that that same child is an emerging adult and their parents are trying to figure out next steps. So it got me thinking. When should parents and their teens begin preparing for the transition to adulthood? And what should that preparation look like? Today, we are diving into the transition to young adulthood for students with neurodevelopmental disorders. And my guest today is Dr. Gwen Palafox. She's a licensed psychologist who has been actively changing the lives of individuals with neurodevelopmental disabilities for over 2 decades. She is laser focused on promoting the happiness and well-being of disabled teens and adults, and she describes her clients as wonderfully complex, unique, and awesome. You are going to love this conversation.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hello, Dr. Gwen.
Hello, Dr. Karen.
How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good.
Good,
Summer's been good. It's a good time right now.
Yes. Agreed. Life is good. There's lots to be grateful for sure.
Oh my goodness. Definitely. There's lots of silver linings and I'm glad that I'm seeing them, seeing more of them.
Yeah. Yes. Agreed.
Thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here.
And I know that you've been working on a new program. We're going to talk about that definitely. But I think I wanted to ask if you're getting any downtime because it seems like everybody I'm speaking to is really busy right now.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, it's frenzied and as busy as it's ever been. So some of that downtime from earlier during the pandemic is, I think, catching up.
Absolutely. And then, we're going to be talking about transitioning today, transitioning from high school to young adulthood. And now's a time when people are doing that. And it seems like that might have been on hold for so many students during the pandemic because they were able to kind of spend that extra year at home with their parents and get additional support. And now things are opening up and they're having to make that shift now.
Yeah. And it's a big shift. I mean, my clients that I work with, because we're working with neurodiversities, my clients really are on the autism or disability spectrum somewhere. Transition to adulthood is something that requires quite a bit of intentionality and foresight and planning. So, part of what I do today, I'm just specifically laser focused on transition now because there really isn't a lot of direction for the transition from adolescence to adulthood. I think you go from 9th grade to 10th grade to 11th grade to 12th grade. And maybe after that, you might go to college or you might do something along those lines. But there are unlimited paths after you leave a school setting, that this is where I think parents and primary support systems get completely overwhelmed. And the anxiety, I think, can be paralyzing. And I think that the transition too, because the legal aspects of funding changes, as a student leaves high school, and they move into the adult world, or they leave the district setting. We move from IDEA to ADA in laws, and we see this massive shift from in high school, the adults are responsible for the student. And then you leave high school and now the student is responsible for themselves.
Right. Yeah. And that's exactly why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because parents spend so much time. I mean, I've worked with those parents who are spending so much time making sure that their children have the support that they need in their school setting in order to reach their full potential, in order to be successful, in order to be able to engage with the curriculum and to learn. And then, the end of high school approaches and they're trying to figure out, well, what are the next steps? And I love that you said that there are a number of paths after high school, because I think that oftentimes parents are presented with two paths. There's either college or you're going to go and get a job. And I'm really thinking about parents and thinking about the fact that they know that this is going to be there is going to be a time of transition. When should parents and their teens begin thinking about preparing for transition, and should that preparation look like?
Yeah. I mean, I think the greater the impact, so the greater the disability, the earlier you should start. I think starting in 9th grade is not a bad place. And, from a legal aspect, we see transition plans really legally have to come into an IEP, in that when a student is 15, 16, we see that. But even though that happens, I think the way that transition planning is conducted is quite superficial. And I don't think that's necessarily the fault of any person, because every person that I've worked with is very well-intentioned, really. And they want the best for the student. It's really like not having the tools, the skills, or the knowledge to understand what it takes to be an adult. And so, goal setting and a little bit of crystal balling, I call it you do a little crystal balling, but that idea of what do you envision for your child when they're an adult, even if that's, right after high school or 5 years after high school or 10 years after high school, whatever that is. What do you envision them doing? If you're a parent that's, I see some community college or maybe some collegiate level experiences for my child or for my adolescent, then I would encourage parents to really look at college readiness skills. What are those skills? And I think that's what happens. Parents don't know what those skills are. And sometimes the school system or the school IEP teams, they don't necessarily know what those are either, right? Because when the student leaves the district, they're done. They're no longer responsible for the student. So in those cases, I'd say things like, what does your advocacy look like? What does your language look like? What do your study skills look like? What does your grittiness look like? So I'd be looking, really in that suite of like social emotional learning competencies, like the 5 main ones, in the social emotional learning areas, and also executive functioning skills. Those are really going to be the skills that will serve a student beyond high school and into their life. And so my encouragement is start transition planning early. And even if you don't know exactly where your child may be, you do want to start envisioning where they might be living, what kind of work experiences, like will they go into the workforce immediately? And if so, what kind of, supports will they need? Will they go to college? If so, what kind of college would you be looking at, or would you start at a community college level, and what would that look like? And then really reverse engineering from there, and then starting to build skills early. And skills are everything. I think skills are the answer to living a life and an adult life. And my goals for the adults that I work with are always health, that they're healthy, they're safe, and they're happy. And that happiness doesn't necessarily mean just like mood, but, happiness also comes from being purposeful and productive in life. And so what does that look like for that particular child or adolescent?
Right. And it seems like you also, in addition to skill building, identifying first what their skills are, then building in those areas of weakness with respect to skills, but then also matching that with interest. What does the young person want to do? What are they interested in? And then how can we match that with, what we prepare them for?
Yeah. And that doing something that is interesting, motivating, and meaningful for someone does go a far way in sometimes compensating for attentional problems or emotional dysregulation issues or behavioral issues, right? When we're dialed in to the things that we love to do and we can figure out a way to make that work for us and have that be productive, then we can actually put up with the other things that we may not actually want to do, but have to do, right? And so a lot of times, teams that I work with will say to me, they just have to do it. Life is full of situations which we don't want to do, activities that we don't want to do, but we have to because that's like #adulting. And what I say is, yeah, well, that makes sense when that's in smaller ratio or proportion to doing something that we love to do for more of the time, right? But if we're queued up into doing things that we may not find meaningful for ourselves, and that's happening all the time, then I think that that really we should challenge what's happening for that student. So a good example of this actually is when a student might go into a transition program right after high school. So, for many students, if they're identified under an IEP and they're a non-diploma track, so they're getting a certificate of completion at school, they're eligible to be supported by the school district until they're 22. Those programs, they're not a lot of them. And, you and I are here in Southern California. But those programs typically have some kind of rotation of self-determined or predetermined enclaves, meaning that program has already, let's say, made arrangements with like maybe PetSmart and edible arrangements and home goods, right? And those are really nice rotations for students who might find interest in doing those things, whatever those jobs entail. But if you're a student who doesn't like or find any of those rotations meaningful, it does challenge if really that transition program that's available to you is going to be a good choice. So I love that you're bringing that up. That, and I think the other thing that gets missed are family values and cultural values, because many of my families, while some families want their adolescent to move out of the family home close to when they leave high school, many of my families don't. Many of my families, it's common for their adolescents and young adults to live with them for quite a while. And so that needs to be also taken into account, if you will, because family values and cultural values are really significantly they provide a framework for which we would do some transition planning, because, my clients stay with their families for a longer time and rely on their families for support for a longer time than some of their peers.
Right. And there are just so many things to consider when we're thinking about transition, cultural, family values, but there's also mental health and social support. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the relationship between those two things and what that means for outcomes for young adults.
Yeah. Going back to those, this is why I love social emotional learning and the way that CASEL really sets up the 5 competencies, right, of social emotional learning being self-awareness, self-monitoring, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. When we have a framework for which to think about our social emotional life or the way in which we understand ourselves, our emotions, how our belief systems might interact and how we then bump up against the world, around us. When those pieces are not developed well, we find that, and I find that what happens is we begin to chase behavioral and emotional stability. And when that happens, that does create a kind of a chronic stress on a family, as well as obviously the adolescent. But mental health, not only for the adolescent that's transitioning, but also for their family, is a critical thing. You and I both know that both anxiety and depression, which I really feel are kind of two sides of the same coin in many ways, they really shut us down. They don't prepare us to be open, expansive, and curious by any means, which is really what transitioning to adulthood really requires, is curiosity and not judgment. But mental health is huge. And actually, when I'm thinking about or helping a family plan the transition, I do talk to parents we do a deep dive into their emotional resourcing, because the options after high school, because they're so varied, if you're going to, let's say, rely on regional center, which many of my clients are regional center consumers, do you want to go self-determination? And if you do you have the emotional and attentional resourcing to be the hub or the manager of your child's program and services? Many times the parents that I'm working with they are disabled themselves. And that might not be a neurological disability, but many times a medical disability. And so, that changes how much support this family can give after coming really out of usually a heavy amount of support from the school district. So things change dramatically. And I think understanding funding as well is important. But yes, mental health is everything. And a family's ability to plan and organize and stay gritty, or be able to even evaluate and reflect on what's happening, is also really, I think, paramount in how you transition plan.
Right. And then you also had mentioned kind of the cultural factors to think about and family factors, and that support, the level of support, it sounds like is going to be important to think about and to consider and plan for, in terms of how much support is a family able to give, a transitioning young adult after they leave the school district. And that's something to kind of think about as they're preparing for this transition. And there are a number of differences and similarities in typically developing young people, and also those with autism spectrum disorder and other neurodevelopmental challenges. And those are all things we need to take into consideration, because those students, those young people, are going to have different strengths and weaknesses. And you have to be able to identify those in order to prepare them for adulting, right? So when is a transition assessment appropriate, and what would that look like for a parent who, has a young person, they're in 9th grade, or maybe they're in 11th grade, and they still haven't figured out what the next steps are. They want to kind of tap into their child's skill level, strengths, weaknesses, and options after leaving high school. What would that look like?
Yeah. So, it's funny to me because, one, parents are really the resident experts on their children.
Absolutely.
And that they are a wealth of information and knowledge, and know their adolescent or child intimately, really. And then when I ask them to describe their child or their adolescent, they stumble. Oh, I've never thought about it that way. Oh, and I'll say, describe so-and-so. What do they love? And, and usually if I ask more specific questions, what do they love to do? If you left them alone for an entire day, what would that look like? What do they hate? Like, what would be a horrible day for them? It's some of these questions that I find I have to get creative with the type of question that I ask in order to clarify very clearly who this person is, right? And so I think what is very helpful is to engage in a formal process of describing and identifying who their child is at that time. So we know that we evolve and develop and grow and change. Thank goodness we do. This is why you and we do what we do, because there is the potential for growth, change, and movement. And so, but it is needing to sit down. It is the formal process of attention to even sit down and be like, hey, who is my child? Let me describe them. What are their strengths? What comes easy? What are their weaknesses or barriers or edges, right? Or where do they stretch? Where do they have to stretch? Okay, write those things down. I even encourage parents to even evaluate their child's sensory profile. And I do that in a very, very simple way, actually, which is, we take the 7 senses and it's the 5 usual ones that everyone thinks about. And then we add vestibular and proprioceptive. Vestibular being, where your positioning, meaning are you upright? Are you laying down? That also has to do with dizziness and then proprioception. So, pressure into the body. Those two senses are often neglected, but very important because many of my clients seek those areas or are hypersensitive to those areas. And I'll have parents just do a plus minus equal next to those. We hyper, hypo, or equal. It's pretty average. The reason why I look at that sensory kind of profile really quickly is because it's the first way in which our body encodes the world. And so it does give us good information about how big a classroom should be or not be, how much stimulation can come in, outside, inside, so kind of like some of these preferences and the way in which someone comfortably exists in the world. But, leading parents through these questions, asking them about value systems, asking them about, another good clarifying question are dreams and fears. What are your dreams for your child? What are your fears for them? Those are they're very visceral questions, and they get down to the emotional aspects of truly what a parent is feeling, And so, but I would encourage a parent to do that. And I encourage parents to do that at least yearly. Birthdays are not, in some way, shape, or form, maybe on a birthday or maybe at the top of the year, or, maybe it's in alignment with IEP meetings and progress reporting times. That is really helpful because when you can articulate that and then you have the language or the tools, that does then help you kind of do a little bit of crystal balling for the future so you can reverse engineer what you should be working on now. And you and I both know, like my clients, they need more time and more repetition to learn skills. And so we want to just keep our mind on skill building all the time, skill building all the time.
Absolutely. And I think that process also helps parents to really, again, take a look at who their child is, like you were saying, at this moment in time, because you have to also consider that where they are now is not where they might be 3 years from now. And their skills will change. Their interests might change. Mm-hmm. And we have to be willing, and the parents have to be willing to be flexible with that. And it also gives an opportunity for parents to kind of take stock and look at their own expectations for their child. And does that match up with what the child, adolescent, young person wants for themselves, right? And I think that's an important thing to consider as well, because I've seen parents have one expectation for their child, and then the child will say, I don't have any interest in doing that. Right. And so I think it's a good opportunity to see whether there's alignment with a parent's expectations and the child's desires. And again, taking into consideration that there are differences in terms of developmental levels and neurodevelopment of a child, and parents might have to be more hands-on for some young people than others. But I think parent expectations is a really important piece of that.
Yeah. And, there are a few mindsets that I believe are really helpful when we think about transition planning. And some of these mindsets they exist in the disability community. But this idea of the presumption of competence is a very important one as we really ignite the agency of an adolescent. So many times, and if we think about systemically what's happening at the school district level from elementary to junior high to high school, the student doesn't really get brought into an IEP. Hopefully they do anyway, until high school, right? But really everyone is planning around them for them, right? So that idea of nothing about us without us really doesn't come into play until much later, if ever at all. And it's because we do not presume that the student or the adolescent is competent to be involved in planning for their life. And it's just not true, And so my encouragement here is that transition planning should absolutely occur. And this should word is is the hated S word that, psychologists don't love to use. But, including your adolescent in transition planning is absolutely critical. Because if you do not expose them to the experience of doing so, they don't learn how to problem solve. They don't learn how to speak up for themselves. And, what do I say to my clients all the time? If you do not communicate what it is you want or desire, people will make decisions for you that you may not like. You need a voice. And we need to, early on, we need to teach our adolescents how to have a voice. And so if we wait, until they've left school.
I agree. And that really speaks to those self-advocacy skills. When you talked about skills initially, and we think about, okay, they have to know how to pay attention. They have to have good executive functioning skills, planning and organization, decision-making, judgment. But those skills that are needed for self-advocacy are critical, because then you can't let people know what it is that you need.
Yep.
And that's essential.
It's essential. I mean, the foundation of advocacy is self-awareness. If I had to choose any competency in the social emotional suite of skills, I would put most of my energies into self-awareness if the self-awareness skills are not there. And it's because when I'm not self-aware, or my self-awareness skills are, not developed, I don't even know when I need help. Right. And so if we think about being an adult, there's kind of 3 steps to help, right? It's 1, I notice that I need help. 2, I know how to ask for help. And that includes what I say and who I ask. And 3, I actually use the help I actually use the tips or the strategies or the help that I got. I actually follow through on that. Right. It sounds really simple, but that actually, if you just break down that in and of itself, and parents were like, oh, I'm really overwhelmed with this transition process, right? What are some of the most pivotal skills? What's the biggest lever to pull if I had to only choose some skills? That's just one area that I might recommend for parents, right? That 3-step, those 3 aspects of asking for help or advocacy. Can your child do that? Right? And so you and I both know there's lots of things, lots of skills that make up what I just said. It's not just 3 skills.
Right.
But it's critical, Karen. And from a mood perspective, going back to mental health, when we do not feel like we are agents in our life, we get anxious and then depressed. And then we've got both, because we don't have anything that's real to rely on, refer back to, or have as experience that informs us that we can.
Right. Right. And that really speaks to, again, if you think about that depression and anxiety, it speaks to your own self-efficacy with respect to letting people know what it is that you need. Are you able to do that? It's one thing to be aware of what you need, but do you feel that you are able to express what it is that you need so that other people can understand?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that there are so many ways to ask for help. You don't have to be a speaker or a talker to do that. A good portion of my clients are non-talkers. They are total communicators, meaning they use, sign language and gestures and maybe some words or sounds with full body gestures, maybe with a picture communication system or OGCOM system. I've got typers who are brilliant in winning poetry contests all over the planet and don't speak, right? Because they type. There's so many ways to use your voice, but man, the voice is critical in the transition to adulthood. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's clear that this is your area of expertise, and you saw a need to develop a system because there wasn't something available for parents. And I would love for you to talk about your transitioning planning system for parents, because I think, again, parents have kind of been left out of this process. And, you talked about students being left out, and they need support. Parents need support so that they can help their young person, their child or adolescent with this transition. So first, why did you create the system? And then tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. I took my own advice. I say to my clients a lot, you know what? Let's turn that complaint into a request or action. I say this a lot, right?
I love that.
And I've been complaining about transition planning for almost a decade, right? As my clients have gotten older, so I've had some clients for a while, and all the way from now 5th grade, and now they've graduated or college, or they've moved on with their life. But I've been with all of these clients, and then being involved, going, what is this? Like this transition plan by well-intentioned people. So you're telling me that we're going to we're going to prepare for this person's life by you doing a interview or giving someone, let's say an inventory, but their reading skill is at 1st grade. And I know this inventory is at 4th. So now all of your ideas about transition are based on this inventory that I'm actually not sure that the information's valid. Right. And I know that because it came up that their recommended career choice should be a pastor or a manicurist, which I'm not even kidding about it, but have nothing to do with their interests, their family value system. They're like smell sensitive. It was just mind boggling to me. And then I was involved over and over and over again. And what I found to be so disturbing to me was that my clients would go back to their family systems with this kind of void of support because they left the district. And none of that plan did anything to answer questions, to bind anxiety, to give them a path forward into a life that was meaningful to live, right? So I saw this over and over and over again by well-intentioned people. And I was like, the problem is that we don't have a tool. We don't have a framework for which to think about transition. And that the people who need to stay engaged in transition, even though they're tired, are the parents, right? It's like the other piece too, I think for me, Karen, is I loathe inefficiency. So already the resource allocation for my families is high, right? They are spread thin, not just from a financial perspective a lot of times, but really from an emotional, attentional, and energetic perspective. And they're spinning their wheels, smoke's coming out of the tires, and they're going nowhere because the parking brake's on. And it's like, as someone who really believes in actions, not words, I'm like, we got to change. I need to disrupt the system. And so I was like, how can I re-engage parents back into a place where they need to be re-engaged and re-empowered? And that is transition planning, really. How do I re-engage them? I re-engage them by giving them a system that they can depend on and follow year after year, right? Give them a framework for which, so, not only, I think, and we've kind of touched upon this, not only are the mindsets important to have in transition planning or the way in which we live our life, right? Curiosity, not judgment, the presumption of competence, nothing about us without us. The idea of really this curiosity of life. Because when you think about transition planning, you got to know what the skills are that are necessary for being an adult. But who has put those skills in one place where a parent can say, oh, self-awareness is comprised of 10 different skills, right? How can I go through these and say, wow, like I'll give you an example for self-awareness, a very basic one. When I ask my clients, describe yourself, and they have a difficult time, I'll say, start with describing your physical characteristics. Do you know how many of my clients have to pull out, no joke, their driver's license and go, I've got brown hair, I'm 5'9", and I'm 150 pounds. I was like, who filled out your driver's license application? Not you, right? Let's just start there. Let's start with you looking at yourself, just physically. But parents don't know how to do that, right? So for me, it was really curating necessary skills that I see to be critical in adult living and putting them all in one place. For a parent to say, yes, this my child can, or no, they can't. And my system is very simple in the sense that either you do it or you don't. Again, no judgment. That's it, right? Because when we chase prompts, and we could have another episode on IEP goal writing, Karen.
Oh my goodness. We need to have that episode.
We need to have that episode. I don't write any IEP goals with prompts. And I don't want to, again, I'm transition focused. So I'm only looking at skills in the living, learning, and working areas of living, of adult life. So not necessarily, academic pieces, right? I'm looking more about the skills that support you in the academic setting, right? We chase, let's say, money. Money's a great goal. I see money all the time. But now we've spent 4 years paying for something with cash. From 5 prompts 1 year to 4 prompts 1 year to 3 prompts 1 year to 2 prompts 1 year. And we still don't have that skill? Like at some point in time, is it like, hey, let's develop a digital workaround for that and get on with life? There's, again, no judgment, but when you can have parents see what the skills are that are necessary to evaluate if your child can be healthy, safe, and happy as an adult, you can start to then back up and say, you know what? We've worked on money, paper money, for a really long time. And it's not that I'm giving up on this. It's like, isn't there just a more efficient way to do this? Because it's really not important. It's not important for us to be stuck in a Trader Joe's line, counting out single dollar bills for a $45 tab and losing your place at the $8th and then starting all over again. Like, I'd rather them focus on actually finding those things and being regulated in Trader Joe's.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so how do we really look at that? And I think when parents, it's almost like, I call it an adult skills physical. When parents do that with their child, and I empower parents through my system to do it with their adolescent, alongside their adolescent, and it leads you through that first part. Describe yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What is your sensory profile? What do you love? What do you really hate, right? All of these things, we do this together. And then we evaluate the skills together. And then in essence, when you've got 400, there's over 400 skills curated in my system. You now have a curriculum, right? For everything you have a 0 on, you can now make choices and prioritize them based on your family values about what you're going to want to do. And so my encouragement here, and I encourage my families to do this, is don't write goals based on prompts. Write them based on frequency, daily, weekly, monthly. And that's when you know exactly what someone is going to need later. And it's okay if money is always a 0 year after year after year. Hey, guess what? Now we have really nice evidence that we need support there.
Right. Absolutely.
Done.
Absolutely.
If you get 0s across your legal aspects because there's a legal aspects. I have a safety, I evaluate safety across like household, community, technology, and sexual safety. Those are all important. Online safety, right? If you're getting zeros in safety, again, this is not a value judgment on what like something bad's happening. It's just saying, wow, this confirms my gut instinct as a parent that we need support in a very significant way. That's okay. But now you could bring that to your IEP, you could bring that to your IPP and say, you don't want to give me support, but we've been working on this for 4 years. And this is not in the realm of achievable for my adolescent. And that's okay. But I need to make sure that if something were to happen to me, they're going to be okay.
Right.
So the system really does that. It's a 3-step system. It evaluates who you are in the moment. Today, you go through the inventory, which, you evaluate what your adult skills are today. And then the third phase is you pick those, you commit to daily, weekly, monthly goals, you work on them, and you come back and the minute you finish one, you come back and you pick another. And it's really that simple. It's overwhelming because there's a lot of skills, but that's really simply what it is. But I think giving parents that framework binds their anxiety or redirects it to something productive to take action.
Right. And it just seems like you really are able to identify, again, that skill level, because now like you're saying, now we know what to work on. And that is so important because otherwise you don't know. And you're just basing your movement in one or more directions based on, again, IEP goals, which may not be something that is important for your child's daily life as they're making the transition to adulthood.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm not so concerned about writing a paragraph that's grammatically correct. Now, mind you, if you're going to the collegiate setting, that is an important thing for us to understand. But for many of my clients, they're not able to stay regulated, let's say, in a community environment. That is more concerning to me. Do you have the coping skills? Do you know when you're becoming dysregulated? And do you have a toolbox to use in order to re-regulate yourself or get yourself out of that situation? That's a more important goal for me because then life is more comfortable to live.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just feel like, we have to kind of think about who this young person is. And I think if you take a step back and parents take a step back and we think about what do we want for my child? What do we want for my adolescent? You were saying we want them to be healthy. We want them to be safe and we want them to be happy. And what are the things that we can do to help them get there?
Yep.
That alone just decreases the anxiety.
Yeah. And you know what, Karen, it doesn't matter. Parent after hundreds of parents, their goals are all the same. That's how I came up with healthy, safe, and happy. It's like, that's not like some novel concept that I came up with on my own. As a parent, when you say that to me, and that's what I want for my kiddo as well.
Mm-hmm.
Happy, safe, and healthy. Yes, please. Right? And so, for me, it's really the skills that support us in our life, not actually the technical skills. Like my system isn't going to help someone figure out what career they should go into. But my system will help you figure out if you have the skills to be in a program successfully to learn how to do that thing.
Right.
So yeah, and I think that's really the place in which we want to focus on versus, that you're going to research 3 different community colleges and see which one's right for you, which is a common transition skill, our goal, which is interesting to me because some of my clients don't want to go to college. So it kind of boggles my mind, but, rather can you goal set, right? Can you break down a larger goal into small components and follow that plan? I'd love to see that as an IEP goal, in a transition plan. That'd be awesome.
Well, this has been so informative. I feel like there are going to be a number of families who are going to listen to this episode and get real great guidance in terms of what they can do. And not only for parents who have children with neurodevelopmental disorders, but even children of typically developing children who are getting ready to make this transition. I think this is important for them as well. And you are just such a fierce ally of disabled individuals and families, and you're so exceptional at what you do. And I just want to thank you for sharing this information with families, with our audience, with the clients that you work with. And I would love for people who want to know more to be able to follow up with you. So what is the best way for people to reach out to you, to learn more about your services? Where can they go?
Yeah. So a good place would just be my website, which is www.meaningfulgrowth.com. On that website is the Bright Life System, which we've been talking about. And it's this, it's really the transition planning tool, that, I believe and have seen help parents, really bind their anxiety to help them into kind of productive action. And that's done through an online course. And so that system is an online course. And then, I will be starting, monthly groups to help people. I've been finding parents want a little bit more support in transition. And so, to do the system together with them and their adolescents in a group setting. And that's coming soon, but my website is the best way to see that.
Wonderful. And we will definitely put a link to the website and the system in the show notes so that people can take a look. And Dr. Gwen, what a delight to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. And it does take one to know one, Karen, when we talk about fierce allies for what we do. So thank you for doing what you do.
I love speaking with Dr. Gwen. And after listening to our conversation, I'm sure you can see why. Dr. Gwen also has an incredible YouTube channel, Disabled and Empowered. I put a link to it in the show notes, so make sure you check it out. Thank you so much for listening. And make sure if you're enjoying these episodes, hit the subscribe button. And better yet, leave a review. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.